What's going on, everyone? It's the Fantasy Football Almanac, back at it with another fantasy football video. Today we are going to be talking about top 12 dynasty tight ends. I put out a top 12 dynasty quarterbacks video not too long ago. You check that out right up here if you'd like to see it. But before we get into it, if you guys could go down and give this video a like. I'm answering every single comment. So you guys think I'm totally wrong on a player, you guys want advice for dynasty trades, anything, please let me know down below, and subscribe to the channel, turn the notification bell on so you don't miss another video. With that though, guys, let's hop right into it with the number one player, and that is Kyle Pitts. I think Kyle Pitts should easily be the number one dynasty player, and I kind of want to put him in a tier of his own simply because his production profile is so good and his age is so young. I mean, right now we're talking about a 22-year-old tight end who had one of the most historic rookie tight end seasons of all time, finishing as the second tight end to have over 1,000 yards, and actually the second tight end in the rookie season to have over 900 yards. Second all-time, behind only Mike Ditka in 1961. I mean, that is a historic season. That is an outlier among outliers. Yes, last year was a pretty poor season. Arthur Smith did not know how to utilize Kyle Pitts whatsoever. I didn't really like that Kyle Pitts was not able to block that well as a tight end. That's why they do bring in Jonnu Smith now, which will get Kyle Pitts off the field just a little bit. But at the same time, if it gets Kyle Pitts off the field for blocking snaps and they bring him on for passing snaps, I am fine with that. We still do have a pretty poor quarterback situation, but this is a bet on talent more than it is situation. I mean, Marcus Mariota, not a good quarterback. Desmond Ridder coming in. I mean, he's unproven, but in 4 games he threw for 2 touchdowns. So not really the greatest quarterback, in my opinion, at this current moment. We'll see, but he was a 3rd-round pick, so I don't have the highest of expectations for him. But either way, I think Kyle Pitts has to be the number one tight end here. And I could see not having him in a tier of his own, but I personally do, just because his age is so young. And once he gets things going with Arthur Smith, because Arthur Smith will figure it out or trade him. I mean, he just has to. It doesn't make any sense why you would have such a great talent, such a great route runner, not on the field at all times, but they'll figure it out. And once they do, Pitts has 10 to 12 years of fantasy dominance as potentially the number one tight end year in and year out. I mean, we're talking about Kelce level of dominance potentially. And even if not, even if he is an 1,100-yard tight end year in and year out, whereas Kelce's more of a 1,300-yard tight end, that is still great production. And I think that could easily happen for Kyle Pitts, with the fact that he was so good at such a young age. Next, we got Mark Andrews, and I think Mark Andrews is my number 2 tight end. Although I could see the argument for Kelce, I think these two guys are kind of interchangeable. I'll talk about Andrews first. I do have him at number 2 simply due to age, although Kelce is more of a game breaker, somebody who will help you win your fantasy championship right now this year. If we're talking redraft, Travis Kelce easily, but Mark Andrews does have 6 years on Travis Kelce, which is a lot. I mean, just generally speaking, tight ends age out later than wide receivers, running backs. With wide receivers, usually you see the age cliff around 30 years of age, with running backs around 27, 28 years of age. Mark Andrews is 27 right now, and if he has the same type of longevity that Travis Kelce has had, you're getting 6 more years of great tight end production from Mark Andrews. Furthermore, we've seen it before as he had over 1,300 yards 2 seasons ago. Does take a step back this most recent season, but also, I mean, Lamar did not play for some of the season. It was a mess with the Ravens organization this year, and we're still seeing it right now with the whole Lamar Jackson situation. I actually put out a video yesterday on Lamar Jackson situation. You can check that out right up here. And I go over a ton of other situations as well, most interesting quarterback situations. But either way, Mark Andrews is in a good spot, honestly, because the Ravens are generally a great organization, very well run. Also, whether they bring Lamar back, whether they don't, they're going to be getting tons of compensation. And that compensation could lead them to draft a quarterback early in the draft. Let's say Lamar goes to the Colts. They're getting that. The Ravens are getting that 4th overall pick, almost guaranteed. So they will draft somebody like an Anthony Richardson, somebody like CJ Stroud, Bryce Young. We'll see who they end up going with, but they're going to be getting one of the top 3 guys there at that point, because they'll just trade up with the Cardinals, most likely. But that's why I do like Mark Andrews here. Next up, we got Travis Kelce, and Travis Kelce, easily the number 1 tight end in terms of talent, in terms of receiving production in the NFL right now. And honestly, it could last forever. I mean, this is somebody who is 33 years old and still dominating like a 26-year-old wide receiver. That's how good he is. He's attached to the best quarterback in football right now, Pat Mahomes, Super Bowl champion. Travis Kelce, you guys know how good he is. I know how good he is. I have him at 3 simply due to age. I mean, But if you have him in Dynasty and you have a good team, if you are a contender, I can't even recommend selling. Simply because he's that good, he is that much of a difference maker at a position where you're very happy with 7 or 8 points from Gerald Everett, Irv Smith. Getting Travis Kelce 20 bombs week in and week out is invaluable. But Travis Kelce, again, the best tight end in all of football right now. That's why I do have him here, obviously still in my second tier. But let's move on, a tier break yet again. And I have TJ Hockenson currently here because he is such a young tight end with insanely high draft capital. I mean, he was the 4th highest drafted tight end in the last 23 years, which is really, really good. Does go to the Vikings, which does open up more targets for him. Although he hasn't had one elite season yet, he does look to be breaking out to be an 1,000-yard tight end, I would say about year in and year out. Furthermore, the Vikings do move on from Irv Smith, which is a very good sign for TJ Hockenson, meaning they really, really like him. They also move on from Adam Thielen, who had 700 yards last year, which isn't insane, but does free up some targets for TJ Hockenson. And I don't like KJ Osborne much. I think KJ Osborne's a very overrated wide receiver. I mean, this is somebody who was top 10 in routes run last year, and despite that, only had 650 yards. So in my opinion, it's not like the Adam Thielen trade is really freeing up a lot for KJ Osborne. It will free up more for TJ Hockenson. And we saw TJ Hockenson, how great he was in the playoffs against the Giants. Very, very painful for me as a Giants fan. But either way, a great player. We've seen it before, and we will see it again. I do have to move him below this tier, though, just because he hasn't had the elite ceiling that Kelce and Andrews has had. He's never had an 1,000-yard season. All 3 of the guys above him have. Let's move on. The next guy I got is George Kittle, and George Kittle, one of the most talented tight ends in the league. If blocking and receiving were combined in fantasy, I mean, George Kittle would most likely be the number 2 tight end off the board. Kelce would still be 1. Talking about redraft at least, but Kittle, a great all-around tight end, probably the second most talented tight end in the league at this current moment, with Kelce again being 1. But Pitt's probably 3 at this point. Will be 1 in the future, maybe. But either way, Kittle, such a good tight end. The problem is his offense is so crowded that you never know from game to game whether Kittle is going to be getting the utilization that he does deserve. I mean, you have Christian McCaffrey in the backfield. You have Deebo Samuel in the backfield. You have Brandon Ayuk as that alpha wide receiver 1. I mean, how is Kittle expected to get a large usage rate when you have these type of players? Also, Brock Purdy, I know he looked great. He actually did look really, really good as a quarterback. But at the end of the day, he is Mr. Irrelevant, the last pick in the draft. I don't know how much you can expect from him. And once Trey Lance comes in, I think Trey Lance will lean a little bit more on George Kittle because generally rookie and young quarterbacks do lean more on their tight ends, and also Russian quarterbacks lean more on their tight ends. But at the same time, I think the rushing of Trey Lance might take away from George Kittle. I mean, if you own these pieces in this 49ers offense, I would prefer Brock Purdy because you know Brock Purdy is going to be throwing the ball a lot more. He's not going to be vulturing rushing touchdowns. But if you're a Trey Lance owner, obviously, you're holding your fingers for Trey Lance. I do have Kittle here just out of respect, but I could honestly see moving him up or down, depending on how he does this upcoming season. We shall see. But either way, let's move on to Pat Freiermuth. And I know this is pretty high for Pat Freiermuth. I think I totally get it if you want to have him below a guy like Dallas Goedert, who I will be talking about next, Darren Waller as well. I totally understand if you want to be lower on Pat Freiermuth than I do. But at the same time, Pat Freiermuth is 24 years old. He's had 2 seasons in the NFL so far and had a breakout sophomore campaign that I feel like no one is talking about with 730 yards in an offense that was not that great, in an offense that was rocking Mitch Trubisky for a part of the season, in an offense that had a rookie Kenny Pickett. I think that once Kenny Pickett gets his feet wet and gets more comfortable at the NFL level, I think for one, I really like Kenny Pickett as an NFL quarterback. I don't know why. I really liked what I saw his rookie year, but again, that's just speculation. But despite poor quarterback play, Pat Freiermuth was still able to have 730 yards, and also this offense is pretty crowded, and he was still able to garner 98 targets, which is a lot at the tight end position. I mean, that is more targets than Dallas Goedert has gotten in a season in his entire career. So, well, yes, I do think Goedert is probably better for redraft. I would prefer Goedert this upcoming season. I do think Freiermuth is a better long-term option, especially because he is so much younger, too. I mean, he has 4 years on Dallas Goedert. That's why I am taking Freiermuth here. But next up, I do have Goedert, and Goedert in 12 games was still the tight end 12 last year, which is pretty good. I mean, not fantastic by any stretch of the imagination, but pretty good. He's in a great offense with Jalen Hurts, and Jalen Hurts loves Dallas Goedert. So I do really like what Goedert brings to the table. I think he is about as average of a tight end as you can get in the dynasty landscape, maybe a bit above average, but I mean, at the end of the day, he's never really going to win you your league based on how he plays, but he's also never going to lose you your league. I mean, this is somebody who will consistently get you like 9 or 10 points an outing, which at the tight end position is fine. You will definitely take that. It's above the guys like Gerald Everett, above the guys like Irv Smith, but not quite at the Kelce's, the Andrews level, and I think that's fine. I think you have to go in knowing that. That's why I do have him here in this tier, and I do have one last player in this tier, and that is Darren Waller. And I know Darren Waller is an older tight end, a guy who has been pretty injury-prone throughout his career, but this is somebody with an elite ceiling, as we've seen for 2 separate seasons. I mean, back-to-back seasons with 1,100-plus yards, back-to-back seasons with over 115 targets, back-to-back seasons as the leading wide receiver for the Raiders, and I think his situation is an upgrade. I think the tier of quarterbacks between Derek Carr and Daniel Jones is pretty similar. I would give the nod to Daniel Jones because I'm a Giants fan. But either way, I think the tier is pretty similar. But at the same time, you're going from wide receiver core with Hunter Renfrow and Devontae Adams, a black hole of targets. I mean, 32% of the team's target share year in and year out, to a wide receiver core that consists of Darius Slayton and Isaiah Hodgins. At the end of the day, I love these players, but at the same time, they are not wide receiver ones. Darren Waller comes into this offense and immediately becomes the lead target for Daniel Jones, whereas with the Raiders this last season, he was the second option, obviously, and he was also injured for a lot of the season. Well, he is 30 years old. I think you do get 3 more years of fantasy relevance with that, which in Dynasty is actually, believe it or not, a pretty long time. So that's why I do like Darren Waller here. I do have him in this tier. He could fall a bit lower if he falters this season, but I could also see him going a bit higher realistically. I mean, we still do have Kelce at the tight end 3, and he is 33 years old. Granted, Kelce's a much better tight end, but anyways, I digress. That is Darren Waller. Let's move on here. I'm going to cover both these guys at the same time, Evan Engram and David Njoku. I mean, both these guys are in pretty similar situations. Both were in the same draft class. Both are only a year apart from each other. Both have pretty good quarterbacks. I mean, we're talking Trevor Lawrence and Deshaun Watson. Both guys who will be able to support these two players. Evan Engram, I do give the nod to over Njoku because I think he did build more of a rapport with Trevor Lawrence over this last season, whereas Njoku was not able to build rapport with Deshaun Watson simply because Deshaun Watson wasn't on the field. But both these guys are good tight ends you can trust. I do have them a tier below the rest of these guys for pretty obvious reasons. I mean, neither of these players have ever had 800 yards in a season, so it makes sense. But I think the breakout could be coming for both these players. They are still fairly young in terms of tight end age. David Njoku being 26, Evan Engram being 27. So I think both these guys find themselves in pretty interesting situations with good quarterbacks. The problem is their competition too. I mean, the Jaguars bring in Calvin Ridley, who's going to take up targets. I mean, it's Calvin Ridley, a guy who had 1,400 yards in a season before getting banned for gambling. And then David Njoku, they do bring in Elijah Moore, who I think is one of the most slept-on players in all of fantasy football. But anyways, let's move on to our last 3 players, and I'm going to cover these 3 players all together as well. I do have them a tier below yet again, so Evan Engram and Njoku are my 4th tier guys. Then I got Chig, Okonkwo, Greg Dulcich, and Michael Mayer in my 5th tier, and I think you guys could see why I have these guys in my 5th tier. These are all young, unproven guys, but with a ton of potential. I mean, we're talking about Chig Okonkwo almost leading all tight ends in yards per route run, which is a very indicative metric of success at the NFL level. We're talking Greg Dulcich, a guy who still had over 400 yards his rookie season, despite dealing with terrible quarterback play in Russell Wilson. And we're talking Michael Mayer, a very hyped up draft pick in this upcoming draft. I mean, somebody who is not only getting first round buzz, but we're talking potentially top 20 buzz, which is a great sign for a tight end. The thing is, all these guys are young, and it's very hard to break out as a young tight end. I mean, very few tight ends are able to produce very well in their first 2 seasons. That's why I think it's better to go out and trade for guys like this later on, rather than trying to get them now and hit early on a guy like Michael Mayer, because their first 2 seasons are generally going to be pretty rough. I mean, look at most tight ends, that's how it's going to be. But Anyways, guys, that's going to be it from me. Hope you guys did enjoy the video. If you did, go down, give this video a like. I'm answering every single comment. So if you guys have any questions, let me know down below. And subscribe to the channel. Turn the notification bell on. And as always, guys, have a good day, a good night, and a good life.